kicked on and available now. And so I thank you for that. Before I jump into the message this morning, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. One, we're in a new sermon series, The Conversationalist, and that's why we have the chairs up here. We figured we would experiment a little bit in this season that we're in. And the other thing I want to acknowledge is that most of you are following along from home this morning. Our region moved into a more stringent version of COVID-19 precautions and recommendations. And so that we could do the best that we could, we made the decision for 2 weeks to just have those who are helping facilitate worship and their families be available to come into in-person worship. I know that worship does have some exclusions that allow us to go beyond certain thresholds, and we've always had that. We were lucky to do that beforehand, some caveats that allow us to do that. But we also wanted to follow some of the tenets that our founder, John Wesley, prescribed. And he had 3 simple rules, and I know you've probably heard it if you've come to a Methodist church before, but if you haven't, I just want you to hear them again. He said, do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. And it's funny that he started with the do no harm. And the do no harm, what it is, it's an acknowledgement that we as God's people can intentionally or unintentionally do harm. Last week we talked about sin, right? And so when we talked about sin, we talked about how sometimes, even if we don't mean to, we harm other people, and how we still need to make right that. And my rationale in us taking this 2 weeks is to make sure that we're taking all the steps that we can to do no harm, to not infect somebody with COVID if we had the chance to do it. And no plan is going to be perfect. We still have to be able to overcome that. But we wanted to make sure that we were doing the best that we as a church could do. And we knew that we have the technology and the capacity to be able to still share our worship abundantly with people as they can receive it online. We proved that earlier in this season. And so we still have the full intent to being able to reopen and to be able to still have people within the facility who are comfortable with that and who feel safe with that. No pressure or judgment on anyone that remains online. But we wanted to make sure that we were taking all necessary steps to do so with excellence if we were going to do that. And so we just wanted to take a little bit of a pause, recognizing that the increased rates were going on. We did have a few close calls, nothing dramatic. We didn't have to make phone calls, but we did all the steps. And I want to say that I've been proud of our church in the last few months. Most people are wearing masks 100% of the time in our facility, and that's great. You get a few caveats for like us preaching and choir people singing when appropriate and stuff like that. But aside from that, we've been really diligent on that, on distancing. And those are the 2 biggest precautions, really, is can you stay 6 feet apart, wear a mask. That seems to work the best. And so we're still looking at any other things that we need to do to make sure that we do this well, because our area still sees an increased rate. So sorry for the little spiel at the beginning of the sermon, but I wanted to make sure that we were transparent as a church before we jumped into our sermon this morning. Our sermon this morning on The Conversationalist, we're dealing with fun topics that people love to talk about, or at least not always. We talked about sin last week, and we just kind of bounced it as like the types of conversations that people would have if you came into my office and sat down and said, hey, Pastor, I want to hear what's sin all about. No, I'm not going to give you a laundry list of what your sins are, but what sin in its nature is. And then this week, we're having a different one. So Greta is with me to help me again. Say hi to the world, Greta.
Hello, world.
All right. So what are we going to be talking about this morning?
Yeah, so this morning we'll be talking about how to be friends with, or how to be amicable with and get along with people that we don't always want to.
Woohoo! Anyone have any conversations this week that were like not friendly? No? Everyone's perfect? Like, I got a family text thread, and it was awesome this week. Like, I don't know about yours, but like it should be like one of those weeks. And really, this is a really heightened time for that in our world. We wanted to acknowledge that. So before we get into the sermon, I want you to write a note to do this. Not pausing us right now. Please stay with us. Stay with me now. But after the sermon, go look up on YouTube or find an old vinyl record copy of it, but just listen to Why Can't We Be Friends? It's been in my head all week. I think it should be in everyone else's head. So as we've been getting ready for this message, I've just been hearing, why can't we be friends? All right, never mind. That's why I don't sing. So, all right. So we got to deal with the tension of this. And we got to deal with, like, how we have good communication even in disagreement, and all these things need to be prevalent. So this past week, the most pressing issue has been like the political arena, and we've seen a lot of divisiveness in our country. That's partly why we wanted to talk about this. But I want to tell you that this is not new. If you think arguing is brand new, I thank you for like the smile that you just gave me. We have been fighting since the dawn of creation. Last week we talked about Adam and Eve, and we talked about the fall at the tree and all that fun stuff, right? But immediately following that is a story where Adam and Eve have children, and they have an epic fight where one of them kills the other. There's so much in disagreement. Now, I have a twin brother, and we had to share a room through high school, and we had bunk beds. Anyone else have bunk beds? Like, those are epic things. They're awesome. My son, like, wants a lofted bed. My daughter has the option, and we've switched her bed from bunk bed to regular bed a couple times because they want people in their room. What I don't teach them is what I used to do to my brother. If he was annoying me and he was up on the upper bunk, I would lay in the lower bunk, and I would push upward with my foot and slide him on out. That's why they invented those cross rails, right? We didn't have one of those for a long time, so I could slide him all the way out. And if he was really unfortunate, he'd hit the radiator on the way down. I thought I was violent, but Cain and Abel in the beginning of the Bible begins with this violent narrative where two people in the midst of disagreement feel that the extent of the disagreement has to lead to murder. That's pretty epic. Now, if you think it gets any better from there, just keep reading the Old Testament. Siblings and family members and nephews and all kinds of relation in that regard, through the people who are called to be God's people, war with each other constantly. Jacob and Esau, right, are just about as bad as Cain and Abel. And all the types of fighting that we see in there, it just walks with us in the Bible. And then past the Old Testament, we also see that communities fight. We see that even in the establishment of the nation of Israel. God's people are leaving Egypt and they're wandering in the desert. And then right when they get to the promised land, they go, oh yeah, other people live here. You're going to go to war. Right? We fought over land and who gets the rights to dictate that. And then in the New Testament, it's interesting to me that Jesus is this communal, wandering rabbi, semi-prophetic person. At least according to the Jewish people who are perceiving him in the moment. They see several versions of this in their day. And one of the big arguments that Jesus has is with the scribes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And so in that moment, Jesus is fighting people who are already fighting with everyone who's like Jesus, these wandering nomadic, teachers. Because what they were doing was professing a change in the way in which people related to the rules of the Bible. The community was at odds with how to be in relationship with one another. And then you take it another step further, and in the New Testament books that we have past the Gospels, largely it's the early church. And it almost always starts with, hey, you're messing up. So why don't you do this? One of the biggest fights, which we don't fight about today, was over circumcision. I mentioned circumcision in church and half the faces get all red, right? Because we're thinking about a physical difference that we don't like to talk about in church. But they were debating it because they were talking about how could you be in right relationship with somebody who wasn't practicing this, because it was early on prescribed as something you had to do. And so since our creation, we've been arguing over how to be in relationship with one another. And we're no different today. We see that magnified sometimes. We get pressure over watching it on social media and on the news all the time. I remember when Twitter came out, I thought that was going to be a really cool platform, and I got onto it for like 6 months. Now I pay attention to it only 2 times normally. One time a year for one day to watch one race. Because that's the only place you can get a news feed on it is through Twitter. It's annoying that that's the only place you can get a news feed on it, but hey, you do what you got to do if you're going to pay attention to this race. I watch it for that. And then I watch it every 4 years for General Conference. And after I've watched General Conference on Twitter, I've had enough of Twitter, and I put it down. So for all y'all who follow Twitter, let the anxiety go. It seems to be a place where we don't really speak to each other, we speak past each other. And that's why I bring up Twitter. Because I think in our community today, and why this is such a pertinent conversation, is that this idea, why can't we be friends, is because we often speak past each other. We don't see each other as having sacred and holy worth. We don't respect each other sometimes to have the kind of hard conversations like we can have in a way like this. This Conversationalist sermon series really was to model how to have healthy conversations over pertinent and topics that are sometimes hard to wrestle with. Week 4 of this should be everyone asking me your hard questions. And I'm not afraid of them. I might not have enough time to answer all of them to the extent that you might like, but really this is us trying to model how to have good, healthy dialogue and debate and conversation. And that's why it's important. And, I know I'm wrapping up the whole sermon already, but the church needs to be able to have that kind of healthy space, and we need to be the leaders in it. So how can we be friends? What are these questions you're going to ask me? How are we going to make this work?
Yeah, so before we jump into like the schematics of discussion having, my first question is, as Christians, when the outside world looks at us, it's easy to just kind of say, oh, like they're supposed to like everyone, or they're supposed to be the nice people. Are we called to really like everyone? Do I have to be friends with everyone?
Again, why can't we be friends? That's an interesting question, because I think in the church we feel sometimes that everyone has to get along and everyone has to like each other all the time. And I want to just acknowledge first off that there are sometimes people in relationships that are unhealthy. Again, I'll use social media as an example. I have a list on Facebook of people that I've blocked. It's a small list, but there are people that I've been in relationship with that for whatever reason, our relationship is unhealthy, especially in that atmosphere. And so I have that space where we're just not going to get along. It's not that I disrespect the humanity and the worth of that person. It's not that I can't see them as a beloved child of God. It's just that we see the world so differently, and for whatever reason, our better selves aren't expressed. So I just want to acknowledge that. There are some people that you can be in relationship with that you just, for whatever reason, cannot be your better self around, and that's okay. But instead of trying to like everyone, I think we need to start with respecting everyone, because I think we confuse those things sometimes. Sometimes we try to be liked by everybody, and so we become wishy-washy, we become bland, we become a little bit of everything and a whole lot of nothing. And sometimes we want to like everyone, so we forgive things that are appalling out of individuals. And what we need to understand is we need to start by just seeing people and respecting their humanity, respecting their sacred worth, seeing them as a beloved child of God. In the Bible, a lot of the people that Jesus was bringing healing to were people that the community could not see as whole individuals because of whatever their illness was or whatever sin they had done. And Jesus oftentimes was just bringing the humanity back into those persons' lives and into that space. And so we start there, in my opinion. We start with seeing people as fully human, as fully validated people. Then we can begin the conversation of can we like each other? Now, I always like to start with the silly stuff, and if you've known me for more than 5 seconds, I always pick on the Cubs and Cardinals debates, because it's Illinois, and that's what we do. And I just, I for a long time just couldn't understand anyone who believed in that Southern team down there as, being anything. It just was wild to me. But then my mom married my stepdad, and he's a Cardinals fan, and he's even convincing my daughter to somehow like him, and I don't get that. But I still value, I value my stepdad, Mark, and I value his opinion. And I understand that our relationship is greater than a disagreement over sports teams. And now I use that because some people get really worked up over sports teams. And some people get really worked up over other things. And just because you get worked up over something doesn't mean that that is so impassable that you can't be in a relationship with somebody. Some people can be annoying about it, sure. But you learn to get past that. And I think you do that by actually seeing people as worthy and seeing people as somebody that you could actually have a frank conversation with. You might disagree at the end of the conversation, but having a healthy conversation is important. You don't have to like everyone. Not everyone has to like you. You might not like everyone's opinion. Not everyone will like your opinion. But having a healthy conversation, having the ability to be respectful of one another is vital. And that's something I'll always stand on.
Yeah. So following that, we've thrown the term around healthy conversation or healthy disagreement a lot. What is that? What does that look like?
Oh, how can you have a healthy disagreement with somebody? Don't you just go, I'm right, you're wrong. No? Oh, man. All right. Maybe that's how I did it as a kid, right? Maybe that's why I pushed my brother out of the bunk bed, right? I was trying to do that. But I've learned to have healthy agreements and disagreements with people. The Bible's got some great examples of how to do that. In the Bible, there's this illustration that the early church used, and I really think that the church should use it a little bit more. If you have a disagreement with somebody, what it says is you're supposed to go to that person and have a conversation with them. I think we got to start there again. I think sometimes we do not go to the people we have a disagreement with and have a conversation with them. We shoot past them. We go around them. We try to triangulate them. We try to do all these other unhealthy social dynamics. If you and I are going to have a conversation where we're going to disagree with each other, I think we should be able to sit like this, have a good cup of coffee, not a bitter one, have some good stuff, have a good chat with one another where you're civil and respectful. Start there. And if the tensiveness of that can't be solved through a conversation with one another, at least at that first conversation, you should actually be able to find out what the real issue is. I've learned as a pastor that many times when people come up to me and they go, hey, Eric, I need to talk to you about something. They begin to talk to me about something, and I find that surface thing that we begin to talk about is really a disguise for something else that's going on. I love the phrase that there's always a thing behind the thing. It's like one of my guiding principles, both in reading Scripture and in understanding faith and in really engaging other people. There is a thing behind the thing. And so this conversation, this person-to-person conversation, is usually to learn what the actual tensive conversation or tensive space is. And so to have healthy conversation, you really need to be able to have that sacred space, really, that allows you to disagree with one another and to find out what you're really disagreeing about. Because it might start with the Cubs and Cardinals, but it might come down to be something much deeper than that. And so your ability to do that is vital. But then in the Bible, it goes a step further. It says, if you and I can't agree, we're still to try to work it out. We can't give up easily. Many of us are wimps. We give up on people like that in this world right now, right? I disagree with you. Gone. It says in the Bible that after you and I have had a personal conversation and we've tried to work out, if we can't work it out, the next thing that we're supposed to do is we're supposed to bring some trusted people with us. Bring 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 people into the conversation. That can be awkward, but it's also really important. The reason it's important is because they might see something that we didn't see. They might look at me and go, Eric, you're wrong. You're just not hearing this person because you're stubborn. I'm Swedish, German, Irish. I'm stubborn and I like a good fight. That's just how I'm wired. And so they might go, Eric, you need to work on this. You need to listen to what they're saying. Or they might go, Eric, man, you're on it. You're on it. Let's just stay the course. They can bring wisdom to it. They can bring insight to it. What I always tell people is in the Bible, Moses is seen as one of the best leaders of all time. And Moses brought his father-in-law into his inner circle. And his father-in-law, though he didn't come from the Jewish tradition, though he wasn't in that leadership capacity that Moses was in, he could see a struggle that Moses was having with his early leading of this conglomerate of people in the wilderness. And he gave him advice in that space. Really what you're doing is you're bringing in the father-in-law, you're bringing in wisdom, you're bringing in a set of eyes that aren't seeing it from the lens that you're seeing it. And in doing so, you're creating a healthier dynamic. Now, if the small group of people doesn't work out, it's really a big disagreement at this point. But you still can't give up. At least scripturally, you're not supposed to give up yet. And you're supposed to bring it to the whole church. Now, this is pretty much, the harsh end of a disagreement. The harsh end of a big disagreement like this is where you bring the community together and the community's wisdom has to prevail. We don't always like this. Because have you ever been on the prevailing end of a disagreement where you've won? And have you ever been on the one where you lost? I think that's really a vital part for this day. Because I think our society, as split as it is in our American culture, is on that right now. There's a lot of people that are angry this morning. And there's a lot of people who are cheering. And our tensiveness in our community needs to grow beyond that. And I think for many of us, we need to go back to that one-on-one conversation because we probably skipped it. We think that we need to have it out in the bigger end so that we can get to the finish line, which is a space where if you can't get along, with one another, and it is such a disagreement that at the end of it, the community, the church, says that there's got to be a separation of this person. I think we're looking for that too quickly, and we need to go backwards in our conversation to make sure we started here, and then we branched out from there. So that's just some advice on how to have a healthy and faith-based conversation in disagreement.
Yeah, when we are having those conversations and we are maybe made aware either on our own or with the help of someone else that we have been misinformed or that we've been holding on to an incorrect ideology for too long, how do we change knowing that we've been wrong in the past?
Oh, man. How many of you like to admit you're wrong? No. I mean, it's a small sanctuary this morning, but I can tell you there's no hands up. And I can tell you at home, none of y'all raised your hands, right? None of us like to be wrong. Most of us just despise that. One of my favorite phrases that I would rather be right than correct. How many of you feel that way? Right? Nobody wants to raise their hand about that, but I think our world, most of us want to be right, and we will give up correct sometimes, and it becomes bad. That becomes toxic. Because if you'd rather be right than correct, what that means is when you're faced with evidence, you will ignore that evidence so that you can remain being right. I've learned as a pastor, one of the best things I can do is say I'm sorry. And I say it all the time. I apologize to people all the time. Now, I might come across as Canadian in that moment, and I might be wearing the Canadian tuxedo with the jeans and the denim shirt this morning, but it's not, I'm not Canadian. I am American. I was born in Illinois, and I know that's like countercultural for us, but I've learned that there's power in saying I'm sorry, because the word sorry gives us a soft reset. One of the things that it does is it acknowledges to the person that I might have harmed you. So part of my sorry might be, I was wrong. Part of the sorry might be, you're hurt. Part of the sorry might be that this is a mess. And so I start with being able to do that and give myself and to give the other person a soft reset. And when I do that, I'm also making myself aware in that moment that I could have, again, that John Wesley 3 Simple Rules, I could have done harm. And if I did harm, then I probably wasn't 100% correct to begin with. I might be 90% correct, but in that 10%, I could have done wrong. And so I need to evaluate that. And so when I'm given evidence that says, Eric, you're wrong of this opinion, I need to be patient with myself first. Many of us are not patient with ourselves. We are so impatient, and we want to be in a comfortable space. And being patient with ourselves and being incorrect is an uncomfortable space, but we need to learn how to walk through that. And then we need to learn how to make that right. We need to learn how to fix that. And that restorative process can sometimes feel embarrassing and be a struggle. And that's why sorry is such a powerful word, and it's also such a hard word to say for many of us. And so what I've learned as a pastor is that I need to practice that on a regular basis. And I need to acknowledge that. I get a lot of guff sometimes from people who are like, you didn't need to say sorry for that. You didn't do that or whatever. Or that wasn't that big of a deal. But if I practice this, I learn a bit of humility, and I learn the grace that I need to accept that change. And I want to tell you, like, if you accept that you are wrong every once in a while, and you work on that change, one, you get to be more right. Like, everyone likes being right. Everyone likes getting it good, right? So if you accept that you're wrong once in a while, now you're going to be more right than you were in the past. And if you can accept that you're wrong once in a while and start that process of change, it gives you a credibility and a credence in the community that allows you to help the rest of the community in the spaces in which they might be wrong, because they've seen that you've modeled for them already being wrong and overcoming that.
Yeah, so kind of in relation with that question, if we are in a discussion and we know without a doubt 100% that the other person is wrong, how do we present information or evidence that can help them recognize their error without being mean?
We just say, I'm right, you're wrong, na 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 na, right? No. Or club them over the head with evidence or something. No. Oftentimes, it takes the respect in that sacred space. It takes time, People don't like to be told they're wrong very well. The illustration, I've been wrestling with this question for a little bit of this week because it's an awkward question. How do you do this well, right? How do you help people see that they're wrong well? And the illustration I came up with was this. Can you imagine being the person that first figured out that the earth was round and you had to tell everyone else that it wasn't flat? Can you remember that? Like, I know there's some flat earthers out there, I get that, but can you imagine the person that figured out that you could go around the globe? You know, and we didn't get it right in the beginning. We thought that there was just a big ocean between Europe and Asia, and we didn't know that North America existed. We missed this great place, right? All the corn in the world, and we missed it. We didn't even have corn at the time. So, you know, we as people needed to convince other people that the earth was round. And that was a gradual process. If you watch that, it took convincing, and it also took bravery. It took somebody finally going, I will sail out into the spaces that I should fall off on, and I'll learn something in that space. And I tell you that because I think if we're going to convince somebody else that they're wrong in something, we need to be able to journey with them to that space that allows them to see the evidence of it in a respectful way. Instead of just saying, I'm right, you're wrong, look, and push them out to go find that evidence on their own and stand solid where you're at, you need to respectfully go with somebody into that space. You need to respectfully journey with them and travel with them and help them see that. All the letters in the New Testament that have corrective pieces talk about the journey of relationship when they first met, or the journey of relationship when they're anticipating to meet. And in the journey of that, I think creates the respect that is needed to help somebody see that a different way is better. And so if you're going to convince somebody that a different way is better, you better be willing to walk with them in that space and to be patient with them in that space and to understand that that hurts in some regards. That's a painful process in some regards. It might be better for them at the end of it to have figured this out, but it is still painful. And so to honor the pain of that is really important.
Yeah. So when we're having hard discussions or disagreements with people, I know for me personally, there have been times where I've pushed too hard, or I've
really? No.
Yeah. But how do we set boundaries for those conversations for ourselves and for the people that we're having discussion with?
Yeah. So again, I'm so hung up on this do no harm this morning, all right? To have a healthy conversation with somebody where you might have disagreement, that's why there's that first model that we talked about, the one-on-one, then the corporate, and then the communal. But that doesn't always prevail in the ability to not cause harm in the conversation. And so you need to have a lot of prayer time and discernment as a part of this as well. If I'm going to have a hard conversation with somebody where I think it might expose a truth that could really scar them in some way, shape, or form, if the conversation has to be had, I'm going to spend copious amounts of time in prayer, and I'm also going to spend a lot of time working on that other person's support network that's beyond me. Because if you're going to have a healthy but hard conversation with somebody, and you're going to spend time helping correct something that might be toxic in them or in your relationship, I think you need to make sure that they have a support mechanism and that you also have a support mechanism. Many of us are ill-equipped today to enter into that. And part of it is the exhaustion that each of us has. How many of you are just fatigued, right? You're just wore out. You're wore out, why? Because we're not taking care of ourselves in this world already. We're not ready to have these hard conversations. They take emotional and spiritual energy. And most of us are fatigued because we forgot about the Sabbath, right? Most of us are fatigued because in God's creation narrative, He has a day of rest. When was the last time any of us had a true day of rest? How many of us have had the time to pour into ourselves? There's a great concept in an airplane. When they give you that spiel of what to do, they get to the point where they say, put on your own oxygen mask first. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? Especially if you're traveling with children. Like, as a parent, I think about that rule for a little bit, and I think about the fact that, like, I would have my kids next to me. How many parents would want to grab that thing and rip it down and put it in front of their kid's face first? The reason they tell you to put on your own oxygen mask first is so that you have enough oxygen to mentally be able to do that for their kids. Because you're going to run out of air. You're going to not have the energy to save them. and if you don't put that on first, if you don't care for yourself. And if you're going to have a hard conversation with somebody to change them, you better make sure that you have got that personal care done. And that is also going to be a guiding factor in the discernment of whether you can actually survive the conversation as well. Because sometimes there's people and relationships and conversations that God's Spirit might speak to you and say that it's not best for you to have this conversation. It's not best for you to continue in this relationship. That's a pretty extreme example, and I think most of us want to get to that disaffiliation of relationship much quicker than we need to. But there is a clause for that. And I think if we are well cared for, if we are well nurtured, if we are well rested and grounded in our spirit, it will give us the guidance. I often tell people we have one mouth and two ears, right? So we should speak once and listen twice at a mathematical formula, right? So you need to listen to what they're saying, you need to listen to what you have said, and you need to listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying in the midst of this conversation if you're going to be able to handle this well.
Yeah, I know sometimes in hard conversations, when you're having them repeatedly, typically with the same person, it can cause toxicity in your life, or that relationship can turn toxic. So how do we know when a relationship has become toxic, and how do we deal with that?
Well, I think you gave a clue. I mean, if you're having the same argument over and over again, you've probably reached an impasse. Now, I would make sure that you went through the steps we talked about. Did you talk personally? Did you bring people in? Have you brought the broader community, the church, to bear to this? And if you didn't do those things, you need to go backwards and figure that out. But if you're stuck, if you've done those things and you're still just oil and water right here, then it's probably a time that you can still say, I love you, I respect you, but either this topic is now off limits for us, or for this season, until either of us make some other choices with our lives, we might not need to be in relationship with each other on a regular basis. Does that mean you leave your community? If it's in your church, if it's the right-hand pew people and the left-hand pew people at war with each other, maybe you don't need to leave the church over that. Maybe you just need to somebody sit in the balcony and somebody sit down here and just maybe get some cooling off time, because oftentimes time is a very good lesson teacher. And it really gives patience to one another. We saw a lot of relationships, even in the Old Testament, where time saved them. But for some of us, the relationship can become so toxic where for the health of both people that do no harm of both people, separation is needed. And you just need to listen to that. And oftentimes that small group of people, when you get to that phase, they'll tell you. Your closest friends, they'll know, they'll see, they'll tell you. This relationship is worth it. If they're affirming that it's worth it, they'll keep you in the fight, if in a good way. And if they see that it's toxic, they'll help you separate that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So this is my last question, but in today's socio-political climate, I feel like we've become so divided that it seems like the gap between the two sides is almost impossible to close. So how do we, either as a corporate institution or individually, how do we bring healing into a community?
Yeah. This is a really important thing, because whether you want to talk politics, which this week is a good example of, or you want to talk church politics, I'm a pastor who's been a part of the church political debate that we've been having. I'm a delegate to our general conference, our international gathering, and I have opinions that I had to express and shape to get elected for that. I tend to be seen as more progressive because I tend to welcome more people in, but I got to tell you, we have to have good, genuine, authentic conversation and relationship with one another, and the church should be the example and the model of that. I think church should be able to bring healing. We profess healing and restoration in Jesus. That's fundamentally what we do as church. And what we need to learn how to do is be restorative in that conversation once more. Jesus was highly restorative with people that were shunned and isolated, either by their physical attributes that had created them in such a way where they would be considered unclean, or in their sin that they had committed, which would cause them to be shunned by their community. Jesus was restorative to people, not only of the healing for whatever their sin or their brokenness was, but also to restore that person back to their community. And I think sometimes we forget that in the church. Our job as a church is to be restorative. And I still believe that the church is one of the best places for that. The hard thing is that is hard work. Being restorative is hard work. It's not as easy as firing off social media messages past one another. It means actually sitting down and having that cup of coffee and letting it last until it's gone cold, and having the conversation go beyond that. It means being willing to accept that you're wrong. And it means that we as a community, as a body, need to see the things that we stand for greater than the things that we stand against each other on. Being willing to see that again and accept that. That's a powerful statement. And in the church, I've never been a part of a church, either as a pastor or previous to that as a layperson, where people didn't disagree with one another. Even you and I, we're on agreement on a lot of things, but I can guarantee you there are things that we will disagree on. But having the mutual respect of one another allows us to bridge those differences. Corporately, the world needs a good example of people having those kinds of disagreements again. Corporately, the world needs people who can say we are greater than our differences. And I really think that the church offers the potential for that greatest ability to do so. But that takes courage, and that takes a willingness to sacrifice. And not all churches are going to be willing to do that. In our conference, one of our churches is declared this week that they intend to leave the denomination. I'm not going to use their name and share it. You can research that if you want. But to me, it breaks my heart today that they're willing to do that. Because as a denomination and as a group, we've always accomplished more together. We've always been able to support one another in our disagreements. And I think when we get to the point where we're so flawed that we have to separate, where we show the rest of the world that separation is how we're choosing to solve these things, I think then we forget about the restorative power that Christ offers us. I think we forget about the restorative power that Jesus actually demands of the church. And so our communities, even though this will be hard work, I think can be restored. And I think it takes individual expressions of that over and over again to help the broader community see it. It's not that we can come up with a singular plan or a singular person that solves all this problem in our society. I think it's the relentless small wins of communities having civil disagreement and being able to show that they can work past that is what's going to bring the healing that this world needs and this community and especially this nation needs.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
all I've got.
Well, and I hope you all got a little out of that. I hope you shared in it. I'm going to offer a word of prayer, and then we're going to celebrate communion together. So would you take a word of prayer with me, friends? Gracious God, we again give you thanks for the blessings of this day and for the church that can be in agreement that you are bigger than our disagreements. And so, God, may you work with us in this day, in this time, in this space. In your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, I invite you at home to grab one of your communion cups. And a reminder that if you want one of our pre-done ones,